It's going to be an interesting night for sure. And let me bring in Bruce Gernon, certified seaplane flight instructor, master captain with a Coast Guard license. He has appeared in at least 36 documentaries about the Bermuda Triangle, which he describes his space-time warp experience. Wait till you hear this story, often as the featured interviewee. He coined the term electronic fog. And welcome back, Bruce. Good to have you on the program again.
Hi, George. Yeah, thanks for having us on.
And what an incredible book you two put together with this incredible story. And Bruce, let me start with you. If you could just give us an overview of the traditional view of what the Bermuda Triangle is and where it is.
Well, the Bermuda Triangle is located, mostly in the Bahamas, but it stretches to the coast of South Florida, and then it goes all the way to Bermuda, and then to Puerto Rico. So it's an area where this electronic fog seems to be generating more often than other areas in the world, although we believe there are at least maybe a dozen other areas in the world where there is electronic fog, and that's why we called our book Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, because it's not the only place in the world where this phenomenon takes place.
And we're going to get into what electronic fog is in a second. And Rob, this area, of course, has been notorious for missing planes and boats, ships. They just seem to disappear, just like that. I mean, do we know how many cases we're talking about?
Well, it's said to be that there are possibly 800 airplanes that have vanished, and possibly thousands of ships, and we don't know how many boats and ships have vanished, because a lot of the smaller crafts that have vanished, there's no record. Some of them might have been moving drugs, and that could be the same with the airplanes, that they weren't being tracked. So it's hard to come up with a particular number of how many vanished. But it's clear that something unusual is happening there. Of course, it could be instances where it's weather or pilot error, but there's just so many unusual instances that happen with this fog, where the equipment goes crazy and the compasses spin, and the fog just captivates the craft, and the vessels or the airplanes vanish.
Bruce, does this fog just seem to appear, or do you see it when you're flying into it? What does it look like?
Well, it looks like kind of like a TV screen that has lost its reception, and it's just black and white with that little fuzzy.
Like when they used to sign off in the 50s when it was a black and white TV, right at the end there.
That's the way to really explain it, going way back to the older TVs. So everything looks kind of fuzzy. And then it depends on the intensity of the fog, too. If it's a low intensity, you can see through it.
Can you avoid it when you're flying, or are you trapped in it?
Well, you're pretty much trapped in it, because it connects to the aircraft or the vessel. So you have to realize that you're not flying through this fog. You're flying with it, and that's what no one in the past has ever realized when they've been in this fog. They think they're flying through it, and then it can cause illusions in your mind, because you're thinking the wrong thing. And so,
George, they think they're flying through a huge mass of fog that goes on mile after mile after mile.
Right.
But then when the radar is checked, there's no fog out there at all. It seems to be clear skies and no storms either. These storms pop up and vanish very quickly. And what it is that the fog could be only like a quarter mile across, but it's attached to the plane, flying with the plane. And Bruce figured this out, because when in his second unusual experience in the Bermuda Triangle, he saw a hole in the cloud, in the fog beneath him, And as he was flying, that hole continued to go right along with him, and he was puzzled by it. Why is there always this hole in the fog? And he realized that the fog was just moving with the plane.
Back in 1945, in December, the Navy lost 5 Grumman Avengers with a crew of totaling 14, all gone, all dead. And apparently, they just totally got lost. I mean, it was one of the strangest cases I've ever heard of, where the plane was flying off of Florida in the Bermuda Triangle area. They had left the Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale. It was a training episode. And I would guess, Bruce and Rob, that they flew into this kind of electronic fog because they had no idea where they were, right?
Yes, I can relate to that because it happened almost exactly 25 years before I was caught by this fog. And it was in the same area, only 30 miles north of where it attached to me. It apparently attached to them, and that was near Bimini in the Bahamas. And also, it was the same time in the afternoon when this happened. It attached to me at 3:30, and apparently that was the same time it attached to them.
Now, you were in a Beechcraft, right, a single-engine Bonanza at the time?
Yes, it was a brand-new 6-passenger Beechcraft A-36 Bonanza, an aircraft that's still produced today.
Tell us what's happening, Bruce. You're in the plane. Where are you going, and what do you start seeing?
Well, I was in the plane flying over Andros Island. It was a routine flight for me that we had made at least a dozen times, and I had been flying in the Bahamas for 6 years prior to this. And when we were over Andros, it's about 40 miles long, where we had to stay underneath storm clouds. And then we came to the western shore of Andros Island, and it cleared up, and we were over the Great Bahama Bank, and so I was able to start climbing up. And this is where I noticed the first thing that relates to this electronic fog. And well, I call this a time storm, is what I was entering.
Did it kind of surround you the more you went into it?
Yeah, it ended up, I became surrounded by it. I tried to climb over this strange lenticular cloud. It was strange because it was so low. They usually form very high up in the air.
Yeah.
And as I climbed over it, it started building up underneath me. And so I thought, well, maybe it just happened to be the birth of a cumulonimbus thunderstorm, and I just happened to fly right over it when it was born. But that's not really the case. And so I'm climbing up at 105 miles an hour and ascending just over 1,000 feet per minute. And it's going up at the same rate as me, even faster. I got caught in it a few times, and I finally broke free at 11,500 feet. And when I looked back at this storm, I was amazed to see that it had spread out as far as I could see on either side, which would be 10 miles on either side, so I could see 20 miles of it at least. And I noticed that it had a strange symmetrical curve to it. It was like semicircular.
Huh.
I could see behind me. And now, though, it had built up to probably over 20,000 feet high.
Wow. Was there much turbulence associated with the cloud?
Well, at this point, there were updrafts that were giving me a boost up. So I ascended a little bit faster than normal.
All right, but not shaking you like you thought the wings were going to fall off or anything like that.
No. So then I entered clear sky and leveled off and started cruising almost 200 miles an hour. And then just like around 4 minutes later, I look in front and I'm seeing this storm in front of me now. Only now the semicircular shape is just the opposite shape, like two arms coming from me in front of me.
Hold on, Rob. We're at this break. We'll be back with Bruce Gernon and Rob McGregor. Bruce is telling us about his story of going into this electronic fog in the Bermuda Triangle. What a story. Their book is called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. We are back with Bruce Gernon and Rob McGregor talking about their latest work, Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Wait till you hear some of the possibilities here. But Bruce, let's get back into your story. Was this electronic fog, did it have that green tone to it? Did it look green at all, like clouds get when tornadoes are around?
Well, we've heard that it does do that, but that is usually only at night.
Okay.
In the day, it's shades of gray and yellow.
So as you fly, and this thing is pushing you up and taking you just about everywhere, when you finally flew out of it, was there any missing time for you?
Well, yes. I was 100 miles east of Miami when I contacted the Miami air traffic controller and told them that I was deviating because of this storm. And I was going to head south to see if I could fly around it. And then they said, fine, no problem. And so as we flew south, we noticed that the other storm that I had just escaped was connected to the storm that I had just encountered. And it was like a huge circular-shaped storm system, apparently, like two squalls connected to each other. And I watched...
It's like you made a donut, right, Bruce?
Yeah. And then I watched the other end of this donut meet, and it was forming like a tunnel. And so that's when I figured the only way we were going to escape this storm system was to fly through the tunnel. And the tunnel, at first it was like a mile wide and 10 or 12 miles long, but we noticed that it was closing really fast, and so we had to hurry to get through it. And then when we entered the tunnel, an amazing thing happened. These strange lines formed all around the tunnel, and they were rotating slowly counterclockwise. And on our new book, there's an artist rendering of what it looked like while we were inside, just as we were reaching...
Is that what we have on the cover?
Yeah, just as we were reaching the other end of the tunnel. See, when I first entered it, it was probably about 700-800 feet in diameter. But on the cover, you're seeing it's getting down to only like 30 feet in diameter.
I mean, it's almost like a wormhole.
Right. That's what some people are relating it to. So I got a really good look at this tunnel, and it was pretty incredible. And my vision back then was 2010, so I could see things that most people couldn't.
That's pretty good. It's almost X-ray vision, for crying out loud.
And so when we reached the other end of it, it actually closed right behind us, and I was expecting to see clear blue sky. And we were on a heading toward Miami, so I maintained that heading, and the sky wasn't clear anymore. It was like this electronic fog is what it was. It captured the airplane, and this is where I believe the electronic fog is produced, inside these tunnels that usually form about 2 miles high.
Now, why were you able to get out of this when so many other possible aircraft might have gone into things like this and they never come out again?
Well, most of them probably become spatially disoriented and end up doing a graveyard spiral because all the electronic instruments quit working. Well, not quite all of them, but all the navigational ones, in our case, quit working.
Well, how come they can't find these airplanes or these ships? It's like it's like they're taken. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, there's a possibility that what's happening here is when they're entering this tunnel situation, this electronic fog, that they're actually entering a natural warp bubble. And this is a theory that's put forth by Professor David Perez, who is a former Army meteorologist, and he now is a professor at the University of Nebraska and teaches meteorology, physics, and astronomy. And he has examined Bruce's story very closely, and what he thinks is that the powerful electrical energy in this storm created a natural warp bubble so the plane is moving at 180 miles an hour, but what happened is Bruce moved 90 miles in virtually 1 second, which would be like 360,000 miles an hour. Now, that would completely destroy the plane.
Oh, my God, yeah.
In the plane. Impossible to happen. So how did he move it? How did he make that jump? What the warp bubble does is it contracts the space, the actual space in front, and expands the space behind the craft, and instantaneously it's just a linear transition of 90 miles. So what happens with some of these other craft that may have entered a warp bubble is they just keep right on going. Who knows where they went?
Well, I was going to say, is it conceivable that they end up going into another dimension or another universe, wherever this hole is connected to, and they're just gone, they can't get back?
That's a possibility, definitely.
Yes, that could be the reason why there's so many that they just can't seem to locate them.
They're just gone.
They could be going into the future or into the past, but wherever they're going, they appear to be disintegrating.
Well, Bruce, when you came out of this electronic fog, this tunnel, were there clear skies ahead of you? What was there when you came out of it?
Well, there were clear skies, but as I exited the tunnel, the electronic fog attached itself to me and blocked out all the clear skies, and I didn't know that that was going on. I thought I was entered a fog bank somehow. I didn't realize it was attached to me. And all the instruments are navigational instruments are malfunctioning, so I just maintained my heading, and because it was heading toward Miami.
Right.
I was able to sense of zero gravity too, right, Bruce?
What?
You had a sense of zero gravity, like you were lifting, like you were almost floating in the plane.
Yeah, that was the strangest of all the feelings that I encountered, was when it made the attachment to the aircraft. That was right at the exit of the tunnel. It felt like zero gravity that lasted about 10 seconds.
Well, Bruce, had you shut off the engine to the plane, do you think you would have kept floating, or do you think you would have crashed? Not that you want to try it.
I've never had that thought before. Nobody's ever asked me that question.
I'm wondering if that tunnel would have just kept you, flying.
Yeah, with that sensation of not only zero gravity, but I also felt like I was hydroplaning.
Mm-hmm.
Forward direction. I was like skidding.
What do you think, Rob? Do you think he would have stayed airborne?
Well, at least for a period of time. I mean, when he left discovered that he was suddenly over Miami Beach and was no longer in the electronic fog, no longer in the warp bubble, he would have come down very quickly, I believe, in a spiral.
Hey, Bruce, did you feel different physically when you came out of it finally, or days later? Did anything happen to you?
No, but after I came out of it, another strange thing happened, and it was an illusion that I was seeing these slits formed parallel to the direction of flight of the aircraft, and they appeared to be several miles long, but after realizing that the fog was attached to me many years later, 30 years later, I realized that those slits were maybe only 100 yards long or something like that, not miles long, and then it took about 10 seconds for the fog to, I call it an electronic dissipation. It just vanished in a short period of time. And then I looked back expecting to see a huge fog bank, and it was clear skies.
And for ships, do they get engulfed by this kind of electronic fog as well while they're on the water, and then maybe they go into this tunnel and they just don't come back again?
Well, they definitely get engulfed by the electronic fog, but I believe that the fog forms usually about 2 miles high in these tunnels, because I've seen and photographed many of these tunnels. As a matter of fact, I've got some actual photos I took that are in the book that show 2 tunnels that are about 2 miles high. They're over the Everglades, where this fog does form, and we've had documented cases where, well, I've been in it the second time over the Everglades.
What do you think the fog is, Bruce?
It's an energy. I mean, you could compare it to it's a new form of energy. Compare it to lightning, maybe, or.
Is it? You think it's a natural occurrence on the planet?
Yeah, I think it's natural. From what I saw during the whole flight, everything looked like it was natural. And so the thing about this fog that makes it so much different is that it affects time, not only space, but time. So that's what creates this mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Is
it conceivable it could have propelled you 100 years into the future, 200 years into the future, when you came out of it? Is that conceivable?
Yes, we have a story in our book, incredible story. Maybe Rob may like.
Rob, which one is that? Sounds like a time-traveling story.
Yeah. It went back in time 180 years.
Yeah, this took place on the...
It's like a Twilight Zone movie.
Yeah.
Right, on the island of Bermuda. It took place in 1964, and John Murphy was stationed aboard the U.S. Coast Guard cutter that was docked at St. George, Bermuda, and it was a Thanksgiving day, and after he and his buddies had their Thanksgiving dinner, they went ashore, and the group was 4 of them, and they just happened to meet 4 student nurses who are in the U.S. Navy Nurse Corps who were visiting the island as well. So they kind of paired up, and John was attracted to one particular one, Barbara, and they went off on their own and went down by the beach and were there for a while and watched the sunset. And then as they were leaving, they found this little trail, just a narrow trail, and they decided to follow it. And it rose up on a hill, and they both had this odd feeling that they knew what was going to be on the other side of the hill.
Yeah.
It was going to be an old British village, and is going to have a church with a steeple. And Barbara said, "There's a clock on the church, and it's stopped at 12:30." And they both laughed. And they climbed the hill, look over, and there's this little village. And they walk down to it, and there's a church, there's a steeple with a clock, and it's stopped at 12:30. And they're just amazed. What's happening? They wondered. And they're walking around this little village, and they didn't see any people. It was getting dark now, and there was lanterns inside the houses, illuminating the houses, but they didn't see anybody. They went over to the church and tried the door, and it kind of squeaked and creaked as they pulled it, but it wouldn't open. So they walked around, and they finally came over to this graveyard, and for some reason John knew how this graveyard was divided. He pointed out the blacks are buried over here and the whites are buried over here, he said, and which seemed kind of odd if it was a modern village. Mm-hmm. And they sat down on the stone wall around the graveyard, and then Barbara spread out her blanket. She had a blanket because she and her friends had been down to the beach earlier, and they sat down on the blanket, and John started feeling a little amorous, and he kind of turns over, and he's about to kiss her when it felt like he was falling into a tunnel, and everything went black, and the next thing, they both passed out, and the next thing, they wake up, and it's 2 hours have passed, and they look around, and everything's the same, but they're kind of confused by wonder why they just fell asleep suddenly like that. And so they walked out, left the village, and went back to into town, went their separate ways, and they planned to keep in contact because she was leaving on a plane the next morning. And so that night, John had a very vivid dream about this village, and so he decided to go back by himself and just write about it because he had this very romantic feeling about this young woman, Barbara, and he wanted to write her a letter, kind of some poetry. So he goes into the village, and he goes back and looks. There is no village. It's just a field. He's looking around. Am I in the wrong place? He walks around. This is the exact same place. No village at all. And so he goes back into town. He goes to a bar and orders a drink. And
I guess so.
Yeah, right. And asked the bartender, "Did there ever used to be a village around here, another village?" And the bartender looked at him and said, "Oh yeah, you're talking about St. Catherine. That little village used to be over there, but that was completely destroyed in the Great Hurricane of 1780."
Wow.
And Rob did a bunch of research on this and found out even more information that's even more incredible.
Yeah, and so John communicated with Barbara, but he didn't tell her this, but the village wasn't there because he didn't want her to think that he was crazy.
Okay, yeah.
And then he wanted to keep the communication going.
Didn't want to scare her off quite yet.
Didn't want to scare her off. But the bartender had told him about an old sea captain whose relatives had lived in that village, and he was kind of the local historian. So John went off in his Coast Guard cutter, but came back a few months later and looked up the captain because he hadn't been there. And the first time we went to look for him, and this time he found the captain and started asking him about St. Catherine. At first, the captain's kind of puzzled, but then he tells him he's in the Coast Guard, and so there, and he's a sailor, and so he kind of warms up to him, and then he starts talking about St. Catherine. And he takes out these pictures he has, old paintings, actually portraits of his great grandparents, and he looks at them. The mother, the great grandmother, looks exactly like Barbara.
Wow!
He's just astonished, and he's had this feeling all along that, and they had even talked about it, that they didn't know if it was imagination or what it was, but they felt that they had lived there in that village before. While they were in it, they talked about it and imagined what it was like when they lived there, and so they were completely wiped out, the village, and the people were virtually everyone was killed, including the captain's great-great-grandmother, who was pregnant at the time, but a midwife came along and found her body and cut her open and saved the baby, and that was the great-great-great-grandfather of the old sea captain.
Let's talk with both of you about this incredible case when we come back. Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, so many other things I want to talk with you about. I want to get your views on that missing Malaysian Flight 370. Where is it? Because I really don't think they found exact plane parts. Some think they did. Did they? And we'll take phone calls next on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, we're talking beyond the Bermuda Triangle. We're going to take your phone calls and chat more with our two special guests, Bruce Gernon and Rob McGregor. Their websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com, and they are wonderful sites as well. So let's get back with your calls and more stories in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast with our two special guests, Bruce Gernon and Rob McGregor. Rob, there has been a theory that with ships, there is something bubbling underneath, and that it kind of creates a lack of buoyancy, and the ships just go right down. That theory is interesting, but again, when you bring in the electronic fog theory, it adds to it, doesn't it?
Right. That's one of the theories. I can't. It's blanking out on me what it's called. It's maybe Bruce remembers.
Methane gas.
Methane gas, right? And it weakens the resilience of the water, and it can pull a ship down. And there's been experiments that they showed that happen, but it doesn't account for airplanes because methane gas is not going to pull an airplane down. But there's different explanations for ships and planes going down, but we're talking about something very mysterious.
What about that missing Malaysian Flight 370? Gone.
Yes, I studied that case, and I can relate to that too. And it happened in an area where is known as one of the vile vortices. Ivan Sanderson thought there were 12 areas of the world, not just the one in the Bermuda Triangle, and this is one of those areas. And the Malaysian plane encountered electronic fog, I think, because it was very strange, and nobody can really figure it out. They're not talking about it much anymore because there's really not much to talk about.
No, and he obviously, the pilots flew around like they were totally lost.
Right, and that's like one of the biggest mistakes. I try to get the word out to pilots, but it's difficult because most pilots, they like to go along with mainstream science. And so this isn't a part of mainstream science yet, but it should be someday, definitely. It should be just as well known as lightning, like pilots are told to steer 20 miles clear of a thunderstorm that has lightning in it, And they should also be aware of electronic fog and what to do if you get in it. And these guys made a classic mistake, the same as Flight 19. The electronic fog attached itself to their aircraft, and it was probably a very strong intensity.
When you say attached itself, like a magnet?
Yes, it's magnetic, for sure. There's magnetic energy in it. Apparently that's why it attaches itself. But it turned off all their electronic instruments, which is pretty incredible for a state-of-the-art airliner,
right,
like the Boeing 777, one of the best made, and has the best track record of all airplanes.
Well, they've got redundancy and backup and everything else.
Yeah, and everything went out, including the radio. And that's happened to other planes, too. The radios sometimes go out. Mine was working when I was in it.
Well, hence your title, Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, because you two theorize that this phenomena goes beyond just the Bermuda Triangle. It's all over the planet.
Right. So in Malaysia, they did practically the same thing as Flight 19. They went through a series of turns. I mean, Flight 19 made about 6 turns, and after you make your third turn, then you start to forget what the heading is. And they made, I think, 4 turns, and so they probably had no idea if they were heading north or south, because they had no instruments that would tell them. And so they did the same as Flight 19. Eventually, they just kept flying. But first, they did something incredible. They went up to around 45,000 feet or so, and the Boeing 777 is not supposed to be able to go that high. It's not designed to be that high. And then they went down real low to a couple thousand feet. So they're trying to escape, is what I'm saying. They're trying to get above the fog, but you can't get above it because it stays attached. Then they try to get below the fog. You can't get below it. It's attached. So they go make some more turns, and just like Flight 19, they finally just sort of gave up and just kept going straight. They didn't know where they were headed.
They had no idea.
And just kept going until they ran out of fuel.
Were there any UFO reports associated with any of these disappearances?
Oh, yes, definitely. This is an area that opens the door to interdimensional travel, where this electronic fog, there could be these areas where electronic fog appears, and there's no particular season, no time when the electronic fog appears, but it seems to be possibly related to wormholes or interdimensional travel, like this warp bubble that Bruce went through. And so there have been sightings of UFOs related to the fog. There's one very interesting case, and this happened over land. And after the fog, we wrote the first book in 2005, The Fog. Bruce received dozens and dozens and dozens of emails from people who had similar experiences, and we were talking about writing another book. But Bruce says, "Well, so many of these are over land or over not in the Bermuda Triangle." I said, "Well, maybe that's why we're heading, why we're going to write beyond."
Beyond, yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, this particular case took place in Indiana, and it was a retired sheriff, a county sheriff, and he was taking his father home from a doctor's appointment. It was like 1 p.m. in the afternoon, when suddenly he noticed this strange-looking cloud, and that seemed to rise from the ground like a vertical wall. And as he drove towards this wall, this huge silvery sphere, about 40 feet across in diameter, shot past him, moving right towards that fog. And as it did, the fog opened up into a tunnel, and the sphere shot right through that tunnel. And both him and his father, they pulled over, and they both felt very strange. They felt nauseous from this experience. And so his name is Don Pills. And after that, he got he contacted Bruce because he had read The Fog and told him about this story. And Bruce encouraged him to see if he could get the radar for that day. And probably because of his contact as a sheriff, he was able to. It took him a while, but he was finally able to get it. And what he discovered was across the state of Indiana, there were at that same time 5 donut-shaped storms going on, very similar to the donut shape that Bruce had been caught in, and he was at one of them, and there were several others around the state. So maybe this phenomenon moves about. Maybe there isn't any one particular place, over land, over sea, but it just happens to happen a lot in the Bermuda Triangle.
Right, and I have the actual video of the radar images, and it's incredible. It's almost identical in size to the time storm in the Bahamas that I flew through. It's like around 40 miles in diameter, and it's shaped like a ring with the 20-mile opening in the middle. And what happens is that these 5 storms, time storms I call them, simultaneously form. And there's minutes on the radar so you can see how long they last, and they instantly spread out into a donut shape. And then in 20 minutes, they're completely gone. So that could be when the electronic fog forms in storms like these.
Yeah. Bruce also had a UFO experience himself in the Bermuda Triangle just 1 month after his experience, his original experience, which was in December of 1970. It was 1 month later, and you want to tell him that story, Bruce? That's a good one.
Sure, yeah. I was flying at night, and it was over Miami Beach, we were at the 10,000-foot level, the same altitude that we were when I went through the tunnel. And when we got to Miami, we headed offshore, and it was a perfectly clear night. That's why we were just flying for fun, enjoying the beautiful atmosphere. And then when we got over the ocean, it was like an abyss below us of blackness, but the stars were lit up above us. And so we started heading on the opposite course. This is the interesting thing. I'm headed on the opposite course that I was when I went through the tunnel and ended up over Miami Beach. And so when we got about 5 miles offshore, we look out toward the Great Bahama Bank, and we see this strange light, and it was sort of dancing around, kind of making some odd moves. And we both noticed it and wondered what it was. And then all of a sudden, it took off right at us at an incredible speed.
Jeez.
And within like 10 seconds, it was coming right at us, and it was on the exact same course that I had taken when I flew through that tunnel. And I thought it was a metallic, saucer-shaped craft and had like a dome on the top of it. It was probably 300 feet in diameter and 50 feet thick. And it looked like it had a mass, to me, heavy, and it was glowing bright orange, and I thought that was going to be the end of us, and we were going to crash.
Sounds like it's all related. What also happened at the Biltmore Golf Course in Coral Gables? Anything strange there?
Oh, yeah, very strange. Let Rob tell you about that when he...
Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, okay, so this was in 2007. It was a man named Hector Nunez and a friend who he hadn't seen for a while. They wanted to get together and catch up on old times, and so Hector suggests that they go over to the Biltmore. It's a big hotel, and there's a golf course there, and take a walk around the golf course. And so they're out there, and they're on the 9th hole, just chatting away, walking along, when suddenly they both stop simultaneously. And Hector says, "I clearly felt the eerie sensation at that moment of a large hand slipping inside my head, just behind my face, and pressing against my brain. At the same time, the back of my head felt like it was burning," Hector recalled. He'd never felt anything like that in his life, but before he could say anything, his friend said that he was having something strange happening, too. He was seeing sparks inside of his eyes. And Hector said, "I realized that we'd stopped walking and talking at the same moment, and we felt two completely different sensations, but we both felt we shouldn't walk any further." And that was when Hector noticed a dense wall of fog about 40 feet wide, about 15 feet high, and it was about 300 feet away from them, and it was between two trees. And it was Hector had lived all his life in Miami, and he said it just wasn't the kind of night, the kind of evening where there would be fog, and so it was unusual. And so this wall of fog starts rolling up and down the small hills of the course, and it's snaking its way right towards them. And they hadn't got over the shock of this high strangeness experience when this fog is moving right at them. So they start walking backwards and watching it, and the fog's about 100 feet from them when it stops and then retreats back to the trees. And so Hector says, "Danny and I tried to make sense of it, thinking of any scientific explanation to the movement of the fog and the feeling of danger. And I was certainly no stranger to unexplained things, but nothing as intense like this. Then the fog comes back from the trees again and it's moving towards them, following the same path over these low hills. And they began to walk backwards again, faster, and they keep keeping their gaze focused on the fog. And it came closer than before. It seemed to be coming right for them. And Hector noted that the fog could have gone in any direction and dissipated, but there was no dissipation at all. It's just a single form, and kept coming at them. And so then it started creeping slowly back again, and Hector was just wondering, noticed that there was no sound of any birds, a cricket, no wind, and he was just baffled. And then at that moment, out of the silence, he heard this high-pitched screech that tore through the night, and it came from about 300 yards to the south, the direction they were facing. Hector said the sound seemed to have some kind of electronic tinge to it, and it seemed to be a mix of biological and electronic sound that merged together. And abruptly it stopped. Then after a few seconds, another screech sounded from the east, this time closer. Then another and another, until there was no breaks between these screeches, and each one was nearer than the last. 300 yards became 150 yards, 75 yards, 50 yards, 20 yards, and then the screech seemed to come right from underneath them, right from the grass. The sound came underneath their shoes, and they started kicking the grass, wondering there was no insects, no sound to be found. And then they looked up, and that wall of fog was 4 feet away. It was just they had been. He said we'd been tricked. We'd been distracted by the sound, and that fog was coming right at us. And then then they were caught. They were inside the fog. And he said it wasn't like goosebumps or even chills from fear of unexplained. It hurt. Every fine hair on my face and body were so charged. It felt like hundreds of needles piercing my skin. The fog was dense, and it was moving, and it was just surreal. And it just felt like thousands of eyes were watching us. And then Danny screamed. He was blinded by the same flash inside of his eyes. And so Hector grabs his arms, and he starts walking, and he's very frightened, and he says aloud, "We are here only in peace and love in our hearts. We mean no harm. Let us be on our way." And then they broke free of it, and the fog starts to retreat again, and they headed right to the parking lot where their car was. They sat in their car and just totally baffled by what happened. And then they look up, and there's the fog coming. It's coming down through the fence and right into the parking lot. Hector starts his car and drives out of there.
It's like it was under some intelligent control.
Yeah, it seems like that, doesn't it? It's either controlled or it's has some sort of intelligence to it.
Yeah. What if it's alive?
Or alive?
Yeah, it seems to be.
That's something. Hey, we're going to take a quick break and come back with phone calls. Folks that are on hold, we'll get right to you with our special guest, Bruce Gernon, Rob McGregor. Their book is called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. The cover's amazing. It shows Bruce's plane going into this tunnel that he was describing. Their websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And, of course, they have written a couple books together. And then Rob has a number of other books that you can see at his websites linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. And don't forget to like us at Facebook, follow us on Twitter, where we send out little notes all the time. And then email me at george@coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back. Bruce Gernon with us, Rob McGregor, their book, Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Let's go to the phones now, as promised. Joe in the Bronx. Welcome to the program, Joseph.
Hey, George. How are you?
Great.
Good. I wanted to ask your guest now, are they saying that there was no instrument malfunction on board, and did they hear any kind of strange sounds or audio while passing through the electronic fog? And what was the amount of time elapsed from beginning to end in entering the tunnel and exiting the tunnel?
This would be for you, Bruce.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Yeah, we'll go to the tunnel first. The time in the tunnel was 20 seconds, and it should have taken about 3 minutes. So I had actually calculated it wrong. Of course, I didn't know how fast it was closing. But these tunnels normally last about 3 minutes. I've watched a lot of them form since this happened. And So apparently what happened when I entered this tunnel, the appearance of it immediately changed. And I believe I was seeing the fabric of space and time right at that point. And instead of taking 3 minutes to go through the tunnel, it took just 20 seconds. And then when I came out, the electronic fog, which is created inside these tunnels, remained attached to the aircraft. And that's when I had
your electronic equipment was going haywire, right?
Right at the same time, the the navigational instruments quit working. And of course, when I was in the tunnel, I didn't look at the instruments for that 20 seconds. I had to concentrate on the exit. And then I was in the fog for like 3 minutes, and that whole time, the navigational instruments were all malfunctioning. So the question is, when I came out of that tunnel, Professor Paris, he thinks I instantly came just offshore of Miami, just 10 miles offshore. But I theorize that, well, it took me 20 seconds to go through the tunnel. So I don't know how he figures it. I did it in less than a second when it took me 20 seconds to go through the tunnel. But there's still a lot of research to be done on these tunnels, and eventually we'll find out how that works, especially with the drones coming out. They would be perfect to
test
through one of these tunnels.
They would. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, Bruce, Perry thinks that after you exited that tunnel, you were caught by this warp bubble, and that moved you 90 miles, and then the extra 3 minutes of flying until you reached Miami Beach, when you had the fog around you,
right.
That was the 10 miles, the other 10 miles, and then you suddenly saw Miami Beach underneath you, and you thought you were near Bimini, actually, and then the fog just dissipates. So, who knows what the explanation is, but the professor has that one. You tend to be more inclined to see it as a time travel experience.
What was the role of remote viewer Joe McMoneagle in all of this, Rob?
Okay, well, Joe McMoneagle was part of the Stargate program, which was a psychic. Basically, it was a psychic spy. This was a program that lasted about 15 years and ended in the late 80s, I believe.
The Men Who Stare at Goats, right?
Right. Yeah, that movie came out of that experience with Stargate, and so Joe was number 001. So he was like one of the first, I think the first remote viewer in the program, and he continued all the way through it. And he's written 4 books about his experience as a psychic spy, and fascinating books. And so I've known Joe for probably about 15 years or so. I wrote a novel called Signet, and it was about remote viewing, and I contacted him, and he read it and really liked it and gave me a great quote for the cover of the back of the book. And I got to know him after that, and my wife is an astrologer, and his wife is an astrologer, so they got to be good friends, and we did some traveling together, and so I got to know him better. And so one day I asked Scooter, which is the name of his wife, if she thought Joe would do some remote viewing related to an experience of a friend of mine and related to the Bermuda Triangle. And so Joe actually did 4 different targets for me. And one was Bruce's experience. And so how this works is basically there's a little description of the experience that's inside a sealed envelope. And the actual what's on the outside of the envelope, Scooter wrote, "Please describe in detail the target on 12/4/70." And from that basis, Joe goes into this trance-like experience where he remote views, which is like clairvoyance, seeing in the distance. And when he starts this description, he picks up somebody driving, and he thinks at first he thinks it's a car, but then he gets into more detail, and he ends up describing Bruce, as he probably went through that tunnel where he was losing all of his electronic equipment, and the compasses were spinning around, and he said, "No, this could not be a car. It could not be a boat. It's got to be an airplane." And that had this problem of losing all the equipment. So that is the extent that he got on that. He didn't really see any fog or any time travel or anything, but that was his focus, like the point of going through the tunnel and losing all this electronic equipment. He also did one on Bruce's UFO experience.
Yeah, let me tell him that one, Rob. I kind of had a hard time believing that this is possible, that he can figure out these questions without even being asked the question. The question is in an envelope.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah, well, I didn't think that was possible. And so he did this one on the UFO that I experienced, and he explained it in perfect detail. And he's a great artist with a pencil, and so he drew an image of the saucer, and it had the dome on the top and everything, and a saucer shape. And the unusual thing was that it had two like fins, like jet airplane fins, on the back of it. And the one I saw didn't have any fins on it. So, but anyway, I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe he was making this up or something, you know.
Let's go to Fred in Utah now. First-time caller. Hi, Fred. Go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you tonight?
Great. Everything's well. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'm actually a first-time listener, first-time caller.
Oh, great. Thank you on both fronts there.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk about the missing Malaysian Airlines 370.
Okay.
And I used to buy materials from a company here in Utah, and one of their employees was he was in the Navy while this Malaysian Airlines 370 disappeared, and he was actually stationed on one of the vessels that was out there in the ocean searching for this airplane. And he told me that, excuse me, that they had such advanced technology to search for these missing airplanes in the ocean.
They sure did.
Like, he couldn't even go into depth with it because of, classified information. That he said, we would have found this airplane had it crashed into the ocean.
In an instant.
Well, not instant, but they would have eventually found it had it crashed into the ocean. And for the several weeks that they were searching for it, rumors, the position that he held, rumors started coming down from top brass that they were convinced that, and this is a completely different theory than what your guests are talking about, but they were convinced that the airplane had been hijacked. That was
a theory too.
They had disabled the radar, emitting equipment on the airplane, and they murdered all of the men on the airplane and sold all the women and children into sex slavery, and that the airplane to this day is still sitting in a hangar somewhere waiting to be used in a terrorist attack.
Yeah, that was a possibility. I wrote a book with Richard Belzer, the actor, on MH370, and that was one of the theories, that it was taken and hijacked. But this theory, too, of entering some fog and just simply disappearing is also a very big theory. Thank you for that, Fred. Appreciate it, and thanks for listening to the program. Colleen in Alamogordo, New Mexico, is with us. Hi, Colleen. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm concerned about or want to talk about the electronic fog. Have you considered the magnetic fields on the planet itself? Because there's about 12 of them. There's one in Bermuda, one off of Japan called the Sea of Demons that I know of, and then you've got the poles. Those are the four strongest. And I think that would have an effect upon people, because if you apply a magnet to a human mind, it has effect upon the human mind to the degree of thought. And then, of course, the whole 9 yards of time travel. Is that why the people of the past called from South America sky gods? Could they have been us looking out for us concerning time travel?
Well, let's talk for a moment, if we can, Bruce and Rob, about these time warps that may have been associated with the electronic fog. And you mentioned that story of that that little town.
Right.
Could this be time traveling too?
It certainly could be. It's one possibility that it's like what exactly is interdimensional travel? It could be these vessels, UFOs, could be coming from the future back to us, and maybe these windows, interdimensional windows, can open up to other times. Manson Valentine, who is one of the first early researchers of the Bermuda Triangle, thought that the UFOs were coming through the Bermuda Triangle through these interdimensional portals and going to Atlantis. He was big on Atlantis, and he had actually done some research about the Bimini Wall, and thinking that it's part of Atlantis. Bruce got to know him pretty good, and he was fascinated with Bruce's experience.
Bruce, would you fly into this region again?
Well, I've been there by boat as the captain of a 60-foot vessel that we chartered. That been there 4 times in the last 6 months.
No electronic fog?
No, not yet.
Not this time. It seems to just pop up or creep up? Would that be accurate?
Well, yeah, especially after it comes out of the tunnel a couple miles high. If there are downdrafts, then it'll eventually make its way to the surface, because I believe it can last for many hours, just like other fogs. Or if there's updrafts, it could go all the way up to 50,000 feet or more and attach itself to an airliner.
Let's go to Dennis in New Jersey. Welcome to the program, Dennis. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi there.
I've been a pilot for 35 years and I've flown in a variety of weather conditions. But one thing that was interesting, I was coming back from Block Island toward Teterboro, New Jersey. And I was in the obscure sky. The weather was down to about 1 mile visibility. And I just asked the passenger, who was non-pilot certified, and I was a CFI at the time, to hold the control wheel, which is no big deal, just to hold the plane steady. When I looked at my charts, we were going through the New York Central area, and there was quite a lot of traffic. You have to navigate through certain vectors in order to get to Teterboro. And all of a sudden, I hear him go, "Whoa!" And he pulls back on the control column, and we just narrowly miss a head-on collision with another plane coming in the opposite direction.
Oh, geez.
You can hear his propeller going underneath our plane. So I called New York Central, and I said, I just had a near miss, and the radio went silent. And with that, about a minute later, he says, call this number when you land at Teterboro. And he gives me an 800 number, so when I get down to Teterboro, I call up and I said, where is my radar services? Didn't you see that aircraft? He goes, no, sometimes we have a hole in that system, in that area, where we can detect certain aircraft, but not others.
Huh.
And he said, you caught one of those aircraft that wasn't picked up by our radar, and I almost had a head-on collision because of this phenomenon. It was really quite unusual.
What a tragedy that would be. My God.
Yeah, that's a great story. And there's something in the Keys, in between the Everglades and Florida Bay, that's an area that sounds similar to the one you're talking about, where they lose radio contact and radar contact with aircrafts. And that's where I had a second experience with electronic fog, too, there back in 1996.
We'll start with you, Bruce, very quickly. What do you think all this is? Just some kind of phenomena directly related to the universe? It's a normal whatever it might be?
Yes, I believe it's connected to the universe, and that's probably why you see UFOs using it, because they travel throughout the universe, and it takes this kind of energy to be able to do that. It is a natural type of energy, but they've learned to harness it.
If you could learn how to harness it and travel within it, you probably could go any place in the universe, almost instantly.
Right.
What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think Dr. Perry's is onto something about the natural warp bubble that is created in these experiences, and I think there's a connection with UFOs. Interestingly, Dr. Perry's initial interest in this whole field began when he was a kid, when he had a UFO experience, seeing one moving very slowly, only about 30 miles an hour. He was with a group of friends who were going swimming. They were gathered together, and they came over this hill, and while most people would be very interested in who's inside that UFO, he had a whole different perspective. his perspective is, how does it fly? What's the propulsion system? How can it go so slow? Because an airplane, Bruce could probably say, you can't fly an airplane at 30 miles an hour. And what was keeping this flying? So his interest, he changed, his whole world changed at that point, and he became interested in what this propulsion system is. And now the guy for years has been building a warp drive in his garage.
I love